who do you hate? And don't pretend that you don't hate them. Don't get around it with semantics like, oh, I don't hate anybody. I just don't like certain people. No. I mean, who can't you stand? Who do you just hate? What if I told you that God sees them, hears them, loves them, and blesses them, and God wants you to do the same? And if we do it, our lives will be fuller, more complete, and better. That's what we're talking about this week.
Kindred UMC live show features adults discussing adult topics, occasionally with adult language. It may not be suitable for young viewers. Please use discretion before watching.
Hello all, welcome once again to the Kindred UMC pre-recorded live show, coming to you not live but pre-recorded from my front room, aka Kindred Studio. Hey, my name is Chris Hayden, I am the pastor of Kindred UMC.
I'm Ann and I'm the treasurer for Kindred UMC.
And I'm Preston and I had something and I forgot.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
We are continuing our march through Genesis, and we talked about Abram's call last week. We just finished it. And now we're going to be talking about maybe one of the most pivotal scriptures for our modern political situation today, the birth of Ishmael. Oh. Does anybody know what's up with that?
Islam,
I'm sure I did at one point.
where Islam stems from.
Yeah. This is...
As they recognize Abraham as the father as well.
Yeah. So, like, often the phrase is people of the book. Mm-hmm. And when they say the book, they're basically referring to the Torah, although...
Torah's the first 5 books, if you didn't know.
That's right. So, do you know what it means? What the word literally means, Torah?
The law?
Yeah, good job. You want the Bible? You got to get them started young, yes. You know how much kids love the Bible. I think
Careful, I might chew on it.
He likes all my little notepads things. That's okay. Those are old. That's from, I used to use this when I was a youth director. Anyway, yes. So the Father Abraham, who obviously Judaism, and then Christianity later. We added a few new ideas, and then even later, Islam. Which people don't realize, but started with Abraham, includes Jesus as a prophet, and is highly reverent of Jesus, actually. And so we're all kind of people of the book, but we do hate each other. So, and we try to kill each other as often as possible, at least historically speaking.
We as a generalized statement?
Yeah.
Not we.
Yes.
I do not advocate the killing of anyone, but let's face it, history has not been supportive of Jesus's ideas of, hey, everybody, chill out. Have some wine. Yeah. Have some bread.
I was just ready for you to end there and then wait for the comments yeah, we do, don't we? Wow, what?
No. So we're going to be looking at how Ishmael, according to the Torah, the book of Genesis, how Ishmael was birthed, and taking a look at maybe some more finite, minutial details. Minutial is not a word, but you know what I mean. So here we go. This is from the book of Genesis, chapter 16, 1 through all of it. It's a short chapter. Here it goes. Now Sarai, that was Abram's wife, I told you, bore him no children. And do you remember what Abram's call? When Yahweh called Abram, what the promise was? Take all your stuff, go over there, and I
will make you prosperous and a great nation.
I will make of you a great nation. Yeah. So,
of people is what
which implies at least a son. And it's a patriarchal society, sorry ladies, but the son would pass on the actual name, so that was what they were concerned about. So Sarai has borne no children, despite the fact that God said, if you do this, I'll make of you a great nation. So that's the setup for this story. She had an Egyptian slave girl whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "You see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children." Interesting language. The Lord has prevented me from bearing children. So it's blaming God for... Anyway. Go into my slave girl. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. So... After Abram had lived 10 years, And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. Also interesting language. This is not a one-night stand, not a concubinal situation, but as a wife. And multiple wives were, for wealthy people, were kind of standard back then. We don't like it today. It's bad, it's unhealthy, and it's harmful, but it was common practice back then. He went into Hagar, and she conceived. Isn't that interesting language? He went into her, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress, aka Sarai. Then Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my slave girl to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." So the slave girl, now that she has conceived and is pregnant, all of a sudden she's like, I don't like this other wife of yours hanging around who can't even have any kids.
Right.
And now Sarai, the wife, is like, hey, I gave her to you, deal with her. You know, like, so there's some strife.
It's okay.
Which comes as a total surprise to me, you know? Like, one guy,
really?
two women, and like, there's problems?
Everybody will be happy.
But Abram said to Sarai, "Your slave girl is in your power. Do to her as you please." Not very husband-wife language here.
Why didn't he say my wife?
Yeah, interesting question, huh? Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she ran away from her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave girl of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" She said, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Now you have conceived and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael," which means God hears, by the way. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He shall be a wild ass of a man. I love that.
Jeez.
He shall be a wild ass of a man, with his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall live at odds with all his kin. So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are Elroy," God of seeing, by the way, or God who sees, you know, either way. "You are Elroy," for she said, "Have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing him?" Therefore, the well was called Bir Lahai Roy, which means the well of the living one who sees me. So she, like, similar to Abram, like marking the place where God speaks to him, and she's doing the same thing. God's made a promise. And before God has fulfilled that promise, she's like marking the area that it happened and naming it the God who sees me. You know, the living God who sees me.
It's ironic. The Samaritan woman story sounds similar.
Well,
God
one of the things we
women.
kind of skipped over is that the place that Abram marks in the last weeks is it's Jacob's well, and that's where the Samaritan story takes place.
Kooky.
Yeah.
So when Abram worships what God is going to do, later on in the Bible, that comes to fruition. Like it turns into a place of significance for Abram's descendants. So, you know, so God follows through, spoiler alert. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. So, first of all, I just can't even believe that having two wives didn't work out. You know?
I know, buddy. Two mommies. Yay!
Yeah, so what we have here is Hagar has been made a promise. Sarai has been made a promise. Sarai, Abram's wife, been made a promise. You're going to have children. Even though you're super old, you're gonna have children. And when it doesn't happen in her timing, she takes matters into her own hands.
I mean, 10 years.
They were living in Canaan for 10 years after doing what God asked them to do. And they were waiting a long time, and she's like, that's it. We gotta kickstart this whole covenant thing. And sends in Hagar. And of course, she's a young slave girl. She doesn't really have a choice here. But there's also probably an opportunity to move up, So the text doesn't really talk about how she feels about it. I think one of the important things to talk about is, because slave is such an emotionally charged word in America, because American slavery is particularly horrific and very recent compared to like how developed we're supposed to be as a culture. Slavery in the Israelite Bible, and remember, this was written in 600, not thousands and thousands and thousands of years. This was written in 600 BCE. Israelite slavery was very different. There were lots of rules and lots of it was essentially a way to pay down debt. And by the time this was written, paying down debt, you could only keep a debt for 7 years. So if you don't pay it down in 7 years, it's a year of Jubilee, every debt gets wiped out.
America, look it up.
Yeah.
What happened? Okay.
So the idea of slavery, American slavery versus Israelite slavery, very different concepts. Still not great, but not as brutal or horrific as
or even the words
African American slavery.
Even the words wrong. Slavery should be known as...
it's not. I mean, it was slavery.
But servitude versus slavery.
Probably there's some emotional connotational differences there. And but it should be noted that Hagar didn't really have much of a choice here either. And so there is some nastiness involved in this whole thing. No one's a hero, is what I've said about this text before. No one in this story is a hero. Everyone kind of has a moment of that was a bad way to handle that. So Hagar gets pregnant, and then, lo and behold, resents the old wife. Who could have guessed? Who could have guessed? So what we have here is one, and this is because there's kind of two stories in this story. So let's start on the first story. Have you ever felt like you were waiting on God to move, waiting for something to happen, and it just wasn't happening? And what is that like, and what stories come to mind around that?
I think when we were buying our house, which, shame on us, we decided to do in the middle of a pandemic, which was a nightmare. But it was very, I remember, and you can only look at so many before it just starts to get burnt out, or you're just forget it, this isn't working. And you spend money to do the inspections and stuff, and then something falls through or whatever. It's a whole process. Yeah. And really, I remember being come on, we're gonna do this again. And it happened fairly quickly, but it was still just, I can't imagine.
Yeah, house buying is exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's emotionally draining.
You did have a trade-off too if you knew the future.
Yeah.
Choose it in the pandemic when interest rates are kind of okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Or now,
you actually kind of nailed the timing.
Yeah, no, that part was good. But I remember going to people's houses and we had to put on the little surgical booties and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because some people had grandmas living there and whatnot, so they were careful about having people come over to look at the house. And...
That's morbid. She'll be out of here in 6 months. Y'all come and see it.
Oh, God.
That's so wrong.
Well, they were moving, I'm sure, but,
Selling the estate.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's a relationship-y, getting older. My parents got married at 19. I've always had this, I don't know, urge, something to look up to, you should have been by now. Based on your history with people that you came from. You should be. So seeing friends my age or younger now getting hitched or having babies or buying houses, the spin.
You've always talked about like
Yeah.
kind of the call to be a family man.
Yeah.
That's always been a thing for you.
Family Guy. But yeah, I don't know. That's just it. There's no patience. Like, I just can't have it yet, I guess.
So the thing that always comes up for me is, and I do not mean to disparage my ex-wife, but I had no business being in a relationship with that woman. It was kind of a similar impulse, but I took matters into my own hands and rushed it. And like, we didn't really even like each other, but I just so didn't want to be alone and was so sick of singleness in general. And none of that was conscious thought, but now that I can look back on it and read all of that into it.
But it's still societal offload. We were just talking about this literally the last episode. If you haven't watched it, watch it. Societal offload is a new term that I've just made up, which is nice. It's tied into this whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
You can pre-order the book now.
Yeah.
Societal offload.
If you don't like that hedgehog that's in your house, figure out a way to love her.
Yeah.
And then figure this out too.
And that's kind of the lesson I was taught by my elders, you know. It's a bad lesson, don't do that. If you don't like the person you're with, then I mean,
and it's not fixable. I shouldn't say it like that.
It's one thing I'm not talking about a relationship that is committing. Like if you made a commitment, you need to honor a commitment. But if you're dating and you don't even like the person, I'm telling you, it only gets worse. It only gets worse. Like it only gets worse. So the next half of the story, Sarai is mad at Hagar. Hagar's mad at Sarai, and Hagar runs and takes the kid and leaves. And as she's fleeing, an angel of the Lord, and that it's basically God speaks to her. God speaks to her and says, "You got to go back." And then promises her that her child, her offspring, is going to essentially take part in the covenant, in the blessing that God has already made with Abram. Like, he's not just like kicking her to the wolves. And that's kind of a gospel message. Gospel meaning good news. That's a good news message, because people who were reading this would not expect God to act this way.
No.
You screwed up, and now you're finding out, is how God's act. And here comes a God who says, all right, none of you could actually stay faithful to what I told you and what we agreed upon, but I'm still going to remain faithful to you. And that's like wildly unheard of.
It almost flipped it on its head too, because usually in like old mythological stories, it's the humans are begging, I really, really need this, please. They're like going to them, and this is the opposite.
Yeah.
She's taking things in her own hands, like, I'm not going to be a part of this.
The idea that God chases her and follows her already is unheard of. And not only follows her, but like meets her in her direst need and actually has something gracious and lovely to say to her in the middle of her essentially participating in this giant screw up.
Yeah.
You know, essentially thwarting the heart of God's will.
I mean, ruining her life. Almost ruining her life.
Could have.
If she had run because she was forced into doing this, and could have, ran already and just dealt with the consequence. I don't know if they had like police officers back then, but
well,
I don't think the law
she
would
have
catch
been
up
in
to
the
her.
wilderness in the desert. Almost certainly would have resulted in death.
Yeah, with a kid.
Yeah. So God comes to her, speaks to her, and then even though the people in the covenant have not been faithful, God remains faithful, and more than that, actually makes up for their unfaithfulness. So like, this is an unheard of act from a God to how gods treat people, and that's on purpose. The writer is trying to intentionally contrast Yahweh, the God of the Israelite people, against, again, remember this was written in 600, against Babylonian gods. There are distinct differences between the gods of Babylon and this Yahweh God. This is and essentially, again, a lot of the message in Genesis is remember our God is more powerful and more loving. Like, those are the two things. Our God is the God of everything, and our God even cares for the people who screw up. Like, our God cares for the people who thwart our God's will. Like, so even though we've done bad and even though we've been exiled to Babylon, remember the stories of our ancestors. Even when we screw up, God shows up and says something like lovely and gracious and good and speaks that into reality. So, like, this is a good message. This is a gospel message. So for me, my divorce, that relationship, I rushed it. I took matters into my own hand, just like Sarai. I made it happen. Of course, that didn't work. It fell apart. It just completely self-destructed. And that self-destruction ended up being the thing that allowed me to really, truly find myself. So, like, the second half of it is, have you ever gotten something you didn't really deserve? Has grace ever met you in a time of need? Have you ever had a moment where you really thought things should have screwed up and God was faithful anyway? Because, like, that's what this story is ultimately about, I think.
Are we telling stories?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It'd have to be, I have a few authority stories where things should have gone way, way south. And for some reason, change of heart, or maybe I was just already thinking the worst. As a kid, you're like, okay, I'm dead. I'm definitely dead here. Yeah. So I'm just gonna assume they're going to kill me, and just, if I get anything better, I'll be happy with it. Yeah. And
anything above death is a success.
Meanwhile, it's like I left a sock on the floor or something, but I think it's, the law. So something like that, and then getting older and another relationship, lying to parents and stuff was a good time. But having it was a pretty crude talk, but it was still a hand of grace out versus, we're not going to take everything away from you. You're a man now. We shouldn't have to have this talk. And there's a few more words said, but more or less, I ran out and cried because I'm still a young, teenager. But to have both parents say, you're a man now, we need you to think about this like that, was a weird sleight of hand.
It's almost I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. It's almost like a more nuanced version of that.
And now that you're older, you should understand what this disappointment is, because someone's probably done this to you. Yeah. So that's your punishment. Why don't you think about that? And
that's worse.
Yeah.
Beat me.
I was gonna say, what I didn't deserve was a few belts, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I think it was kind of when things started really working out with John, with my husband. I was doing stupid college stuff and really messing up relationships, or hanging out with people that I probably, I just felt lost. I felt like everything that I was doing was just crumbling around me, and I could not catch my breath, and nothing that I was doing was working, or the people I was around I knew I shouldn't have been, kind of thing.
The nothing I'm doing is working.
Yeah.
I really identify with that.
And then all of a sudden, I got John. He kept popping up. I would walk my dog, and he was walking to his car in the parking lot. That was how we reconnected after a class that we had together. And it was total fluke moment, weird. But it just worked out. It clicked, and he kind of accepted me in the state that I was in, and was willing to be yeah, but everybody screws up. And it's and he didn't continue the poor influence, and you know what I mean? He was a good egg in bad eggs.
Yeah.
So it kind of took me out of the
did it work out? How did things turn out?
I don't know. The baby's pretty cute.
And that is what matters. For me, this particular story, the takeaways are, one, when we're waiting on God to move, it is a natural human impulse to want to take matters into your own hands, and as best we can, we should invite ourselves not to do that. Really, if you feel true, it's hard to describe the discernment process and we should probably do a whole video just about like, how do you discern what really is?
Is it a calling or a movement?
Yeah.
Or is it you or mom saying?
So, we'll cover that at some point because that is important. But if you've gone through that and you really do feel like, no, this is something that like it would be unhealthy for me to do this, but I just can't stop myself. Let's think about that. Let's seek help. Let's find friends. Let's get it into a healthy spiritual community that can like help undergird you. And the good news is when we don't do that, when we fail at that, and we take matters into our own hands, as I have done and many of us have, God is still faithful. Like we still have a God of grace and love who certainly doesn't mean that we will be spared all the consequences, but God is still with us in that and still working towards a good and perfect will that ultimately will arrive one day. Not, maybe not in our lifetime, but like God will make good of the things that we screw up. And like that's the kind of God we worship. And I think that's the fundamental nature of who God is. So, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.